Hello, this is Gabe Matthews for Pt.1. I've had many requests over the last year to do a video on rendering. While I thought this was not really in the spirit of polyplane, it did dawn on me that many people could find this information useful. And since work has slowed down for half a second, and the people have spoken, heck, why not? This video series is a very topical overview of the elements of creating a rendering using your 3D model. This is a topic that you could literally spend years and thousands of dollars learning about over your life, so I'm going to try to make this as concise as possible. And at the end of the 7-part series, there will be a section devoted to pointing you to resources so you can learn more in greater depth, because frankly, there's a lot of sites that can do this a lot better than I can. To keep this in the format of the polyplane philosophy, though, we need to first ask the question, why render? To answer this, let's look at some of the possible uses of the final output of a rendering. Rendering an image can be used for several reasons. Some of the more obvious reasons include entertainment, such as motion pictures, video games, and comic books; media, such as promotional materials, print marketing, web marketing, commercials; internal communication, like concept development, client presentations, and selling ideas internally. This goes back to the whole idea of concept development. And then personal hobbies and educations, creating a portfolio of your 3D work, just messing around, or using it for visuals for your next great invention. So again, let's ask the question, why render? For our intents and purposes, it's to visualize a simulated reality. Now, before I paint myself into a corner here, I also need to give some definition of the word rendering, because technically a line drawing, Photoshop paintings, and screen captures are all rendering according to Merriam-Webster's 4th definition of the word, which is to cause or to become, impart, to reproduce, represent by artistic verbal means, depict, to give performance of, to produce a copy of or version of, to execute the motions of. So we need to define this word by the elements that we're going to be using to create the rendering. The elements of the rendering break down into 5 different categories. In this first video, I'm going to briefly go over these categories and how they relate to the overall rendering. And these categories include environment, lighting, objects, materials, and camera. To start off with, the environment. The environment is a virtual space in which you're rendering your model. This can include a light box, a studio, a simulated environment, or other 3D models in the space are used to represent the scene, or a composite scene, usually added in later after the components are rendered, or like in some programs, you can actually composite that directly in, such as Keyshot does that, where you can actually put a backplate image of whatever in, and it'll render it directly into the scene. And then the shadows will interact a little bit with the photo or video. The next element is lighting. Lighting usually refers to a source or sources of illumination in the scene. Lighting can come in various forms, including but not limited to spotlights, point lights, ambient lights, including global illumination, and directional lights. And those are sort of geometric surfaces that actually emit light, and you use that as a primary lighting source. Next up are the objects. So the objects in the scene are what indicate the form and the shadows, and sometimes, depending on the material that is applied, it can also be another source of lighting. So this is essentially your 3D model is the object. And then materials. And materials indicate 4 basic channels of information to the scene. This includes diffuse, which is the general surface color, visual texture qualities; the emit channel, which is your general illumination qualities. You won't use that too often unless you're working with like light bulbs or televisions or stuff that's electric or might just have a subtle glow to it. Think of like lightning bugs, their little bellies glow. The next channel is the reflection channel, how much light and what kind of light is rejected by the surface back to the camera and the environment. This is sort of your shininess of your object. And then finally, the refract channel, which is how much light actually passes through the surface and manipulates the position, color, and shadows, and so on the way out of the other side of the model. Now, sometimes you might have something where the light passes through, but it doesn't actually pass all the way through. Think of like skin. This is called subsurface scattering. And this is where, if you hold a light bulb or a flashlight behind your finger, and you can kind of see the subtle glow of your fingers as that light kind of scatters and dances around. And only a few photons are actually coming back to your eye to register that light. So that's kind of how subsurface scattering works, and we'll get into a little bit about the various types of refraction that there are. On top of these 4 categories, additional surface and texture information can be applied to aid in adding information to the scene. This can include bump maps, displacement maps, alpha maps, and all other sorts of visual indicators. And we'll get into this a little bit in the materials video, but those are sort of the main 4 granddaddies, and some programs have more, some have a lot more. We'll cover that in another video coming up in a few videos. And then finally, the last element of the scene is the camera. So the camera is much like the modeling viewport cameras. It's a portal that allows you to see what you're doing in the model. However, the largest difference is this is also your output window for when your render is done. Most rendering engines such as KeyShot and V-Ray allow you the opportunity to select physical camera attributes and apply them to your camera. This includes depth of field, aperture, lens length, vignetting, and so on, and we'll touch on a few of these in the camera video. In the next video, we'll start exploring the first of these elements in depth and then work our way down this list before finally bringing them all together to render a simple scene. Thanks so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next video.